Namaskar, Nileshok in another episode. Today we will talk about the jigsaw puzzle, the crossword puzzle, or we can say a combination, the jigsaw crossword puzzle of Mahabharata. Now, this video is for everyone who is interested in the Mahabharata. However, this is not a video where somebody wants to simply listen in a passive mode. Now, frankly, those who want to listen in a passive mode, they would also benefit by watching this video. However, the idea is to create a documentation for the benefit of current and future researchers and to create a dharmic, darshana, empirical, scientific, logical discipline in how to study Hindu Dharma, how to study Sanatana. That is the objective. So let me start sharing the screen. So the title, Mahabharata's Jigsaw Crossword Puzzle, and there is a lot to it. There is all kinds of evidence that can be aligned with a dozen, possibly 20 plus, 2 dozen plus different disciplines of science, of modern science. And that's what we will do over a period of time. Today, I would like to walk you through more or less the 18 days of the Mahabharata War and focusing only on the evidence that is related to the moon, the sun, and the comet. Even here, the evidence that I am including into this discussion is not exhaustive. That is to say, there is a lot more evidence, even astronomy evidence, that is there in the pages of the Mahabharata text as it relates to the 18 days of the Mahabharata War and as it relates to the moon and the sun. But I am going to focus on a very specific portion of this evidence with the emphasis on the phases and positions of the moon. So let's begin. If I look at the planetary evidence and for most part remove the moon and the sun out of this equation, because that's the Sankhya understanding, okay? We have to divide, okay? We have to classify the evidence, then apply the element of Vijnana Buddhi of Mahatva Mapan or Taratamya to decide in what fashion I discuss that evidence, in what fashion we test the evidence. Now, these answers are not obvious a priori. So, in reality, one starts wherever one can. That's a simple answer. However, in a Pararthanuman, that is to say, once somebody has done the research and now we want to present it to the masses, we have to bring a certain level of coherence, certain level of consistency, certain level of logical flow. Another word that is used is a narrative fallacy, which is to say, this may not be necessarily the sequence in which I would have researched the evidence. I would have identified the evidence, I would have found the evidence. However, when presented, we present it in such a fashion that it is easy to absorb, easy to understand, easy to analyze. So, what you are seeing on the screen actually does not have any evidence related to the moon or the sun. Well, I have summarized it in one bullet there if you read as phases and positions of the moon. And to an extent, there is something that is related to eclipse. And if you read, you can read the word Rahu and sun and a moon. Because if there is an eclipse, then of course the sun is involved, the moon is involved, and Rahu, which is to say the node, the where the moon's orbit cuts the ecliptic. So in that sense, there is just a mention of it, but not the details. In fact, here we would briefly refer to the eclipse evidence, but not the exhaustive evidence, okay? That we will do an episode by itself. As I said, the focus is on phases and positions of the moon with some additional evidence as it relates to the sun, moon, eclipse, Rahu, etc. So let's go there. So what I'm saying is these 50 planetary descriptions that we are referring to in a way do not include the phases and positions of the moon. Just purely the planetary descriptions, we have practically close to 30 with specific names of the planets. And then if you explore planetary descriptions without a specific planet or planets being mentioned, then definitely there are additional 20 plus, and that's what accounts or amounts to 50 plus planetary descriptions. In Indian astronomy, in Western astronomy, in the world astronomy, sun, moon are also planets, but that's why I'm separating just for the way of a discussion, just for the ease of discussion. So let's go into today's topic, the sun, the moon, and the comet. I added the comet because it needs to be addressed somewhere, and this is a good place, and I'll tell you the context of it. So, what do we have here? As seen from the earth, so where I have written Nakshatra Mandal is where imagine the earth is, as if we are standing on the earth and looking at the night sky. If we are facing the eastern direction, as the time goes by, one after another, different yoga taras or different nakshatras pop up, and that dance continues through the night. And if you observe this over a longer period of time, let's say over a period of 1 year, you are going to start seeing all these different 27, 28 nakshatras, they rising at a specific time, which changes as the year progresses and so on. For the sake of a Mahabharata discussion, I have given number 1 to the nakshatra Mrgashirsha, after which the lunar month is designated as Margashirsha. Mrgashirsha has a huge significance in general in Indian astronomy, in Indian literature, ancient grantha, text, etc., but very much so specifically in the context of Mahabharata. As you may remember, if you go to Vibhuti Yoga of Bhagavad Gita, which is very much part of Mahabharata, in Bhishma Parva, chapter 23 through 40, you have the reference to Mrgashirsha multiple times. Now, in Bhagavad Gita, like a few times, but if you go to Vishnu Sahasranam, if you go to Shiva Sahasranam, all of them in Mahabharata text, you are going to see a mention of it many times in different fashion. This is also a representation of Nataraja in the sky, also a representation of a time as in Kala and a Mahakal. But there is also a very unique significance at the time of Mahabharata. Therefore, we see in the Vibhuti Yoga Krishna referring to it as Nakshatrana Maham Shashi, many people have wrongly translated this, and this is not to blame them, by the way. Many great acharyas have done it, because literal translation is indeed Nakshatrana Maham Shashi, and Shashi as in moon, and nakshatras are seen in their great splendor at night, and so is the case with the moon. And so, in that sense, we have this whole story of moon as the husband, pati of all the nakshatras, 27 beautiful ladies nakshatras, and how he visits every nakshatra's house every day, and so on. So the translation is understandable, but it also misses on the deep significance that is there embedded into every astronomy evidence of the Mahabharata text. No matter where it appears, there is a significance. So Nakshatrana Maham Shashi, there also it is actually referred to Mruga Nakshatra, because the Devata, the Nakshatra Devata, the deity of Mruga Nakshatra is Shashi, or moon, or Chandra, or Som. I'm just giving different names for the same entity, namely the moon. Then you also hear Masana Margashirshoyam. Okay? And if you just go again, start connecting this dot, that's what I mean. If there is any reference to season, any astronomy sense reference, is basically not a careless and casual reference. Therefore, we hear in Mahabharata many times, Jivet Sharada Shatam. Okay, just like we say, how many years old are you now on your birthday, and Happy New Year, happy 50th year, and so on. Similarly, Jivet Sharada Shatam, you live for hundreds of Sharada. And Mrugashirsha, or the lunar month of Margashirsha, was the beginning of a Sharad season at the time of the Mahabharata War, and therefore it has this importance of Masanam Margashirshoyam. A season, okay, where you have a very green kind of landscape, a season of sufficient grains, a season of flowers, a season of festivities. Many reasons why Mrugashirsha can be considered a first nakshatra in the context of Mahabharata, or even otherwise, but we are sticking to Mahabharata. It's also called Agrahayan, but I'll not digress on that. So beginning with Margashirsha, or Mrugashirsha rather, we have that nakshatra number 1. Let's do the counting to 28. So Mrugashirsha, next Ardra, then Punarvasu, then Pushya, then Ashlesha, then Magha, then Purva Falguni, Uttara Falguni, that is 7 and 8, then Hasta, Chitra, Swati, Vishakha, Anuradha, Jeshta, Mula, Purva and Uttara Ashada, that is 16 and 17. Then 18 is a Shravan, 19 is a Brahmarashi, 20 is a Dhanishta, 21 is Shatabhishaj or Shatataraka, 22 and 23 are Purva and Uttara Bhadrapad, then Revati, Ashwini, Kritika and Rohini. Sorry, I missed Bharani in between. Ashwini, Bharani, Kritika, Rohini. So including Brahmarashi, which is Abhijit or Vega, we have 28 nakshatra. Yesterday, I think I had posted one chart, I think related to the comet. Okay, and I'll show that to you in a minute. And one of my good friend, he asked, like, is this just a typo that I have listed Brahmarashi, meaning Abhijit or star Vega, between 18 and 20, that's Shravana and Dhanishta, instead of the way it is listed typically in Indian text between 17 and 18, that is between Uttara Ashada and Shravana. Is that a typo? And if it's not a typo, then he said he would be curious to know what was the rationale. Again, it would require an episode of its own, so I'm not going to go there. But just want to point out that this is not a typo, this is not a mistake where I have placed Brahmarashi. In fact, this is precisely how it is described in the Mahabharata text. For example, Vakrano Vakram Krutvam cha Shravane Pavaka Prabha Brahmarashi Samavrutta Lohitango Vyavastita. And it can be beautifully shown to be corroborated for the first day of the Mahabharata War, 16 October 5561 BCE, where Mars came and aligned itself right along Sama Vrutta, okay, the same longitude as Brahmarashi between Shravan and Dhanishta on the first day of the Mahabharata War. That same Brahmarashi, of course, shows up in Ramayana. Now, that time, which is going back about 14,000 years ago, instead of only 7,500 years to the timing of Mahabharata, that same Brahmarashi has become a pole star. But again, we will not digress there. Okay. All right. So now we understand our Nakshatra Mandal, Nakshatra framework, and in that we are going to understand the Mahabharata evidence of the phases and positions of the moon. Now, notice very carefully the phase or the position of the moon with respect to the sun, you can say, or with respect to nakshatra, is described by Mahabharata writer, namely Vyasadeva, in a very unique, different ways. Okay, so sometime it is alluded in such a fashion that we can take a decent guess on what the tithi could be. Okay, so let's begin. The year 5561 BCE, there is one reference of a comet, and I thought I will include it here. And for a reason, of course. Comet was near Nakshatra Pushya for a long time. That's what Mahabharata text is saying. What is the specific reference? The first line is not important, but we will read it anyways in this case because it's not a long reading. Abhavam hi visheshena kurunam pratipashyati धूमकेतुर महाघोर पुष्यम आक्रम्य तिष्ठति. Second line, a big scary comet has settled near Nakshatra Pushya. So that Akramya is near, Pushya is Nakshatra Pushya, and Tishtati is settled there for a long time. Now, the long time is relative, guys. Okay, it depends on the context. In the context of a comet, and I don't mean any generic comet, a specific comet, because the comets have their own eccentricities. There are long-term comets, there are mid-term comets, there are short-term comets, and depending on their orientation with respect to the Earth, they take different orientations when they are visible from the Earth. In fact, this observation of a comet is fascinating, mysterious, amazing. Okay, it should make us all surprised. Like, what is happening? How did these astronomers or likes of Vyasadeva 7,500 years ago figured this out? That's the kind of fascination one should have. Many times, unfortunately, like my trolls, at a drop of a hat, jump into utter nonsense because they do not have even the basic foundations of Indian civilization, Hindu Dharma, Sanatana, but also, unfortunately, of a modern science, the scientific acumen, logical reasoning. And so they will trivialize every single fascinating thing that's there in the text like Mahabharata. For example, again, I will do a one full episode on this particular slide, but here I want to emphasize two words, Akramya and Tishtati. This is not the only time these two words come, and they come together. And guess what? Every time you have to find out how the meaning is consistent with whatever the astronomy reference is. Here, quickly I'll give you the answer and leave everything else as a food for thought, food for your homework, which is this. What Vyasadeva is actually saying is that this is not an apparition time of this Dhumaketu. In fact, there is a beautiful apparition of this same comet. We are referring here to Halley's or Halley's comet that occurred exactly at the time when Bhagwan Krishna killed Kamsa. The year was 5622 BCE. It showed in its great splendor where it occupied the visible sky totally from one end to another, the total 13 nakshatras, okay, and a beautiful description of that with such a pinpoint accuracy comes in the Harivamsha. So that we will discuss some another time. I have watched my other videos. But here, therefore, 5622 is already there, and then it would occur again, what, about 75 years after. So that's like about 55, 47, 48 BC, somewhere there. So at the time of the Mahabharata War in 5561 BC, it is not visible at all. In fact, it is so far away that that itself should be the mystery as to how likes of Vyasa, the Indian astronomers, knew it. It should give you goosebumps. Not necessarily we know the answer, but just the question should give us goosebumps if we truly understand the mystery, the magnanimity, the fascination related to this observation. And that's why, guys, I'm saying this is meant to be a documentation of a fascinating evidence from Mahabharata text. Okay, it is not to be listened to passively, although you may even enjoy that. So that akramya, meaning by coming close to, in this case, nakshatra Pushya, and tishtati is has settled there for a long time. Do you know how long it has settled? Frankly, 75 years. 75 to 77 years, the approximately is the orbital period of the comet. Why approximately? Because comets are relatively smaller objects. They easily get swayed back and forth by the gravity. So sometimes they are slowed down and sometimes they are accelerated. Okay, on an average it's a 75 77 years, but you see this variation over this 2 year time period because of the gravitational effect depending on additional circumstances at any given time. But what Vasudev is saying is it has settled near Pushya. If you can focus on the middle picture that I have drawn there, that is the trajectory of a Halley's comet with respect to the solar system. So notice how its orbit is. It is pointing in a very specific direction, and so for most of the time, which is to say practically 99% of the time, that 1% is when it is in apparition, that is, it is easily visible from the earth with its great splendor. The remaining 99% of the time, it is simply a dot, and that's, if you are lucky, you will be able to see it. Where is it settling? If you can take that elliptical orbit, let me see if I can show you the arrow here. So this orbit, imagine from the earth, instead of that elliptical, long elongated elliptical orbit, imagine this to be one straight line, for example. Practical approximation, mathematical approximation, pragmatic approximation. You will see it's pointing to the area of Nakshatra Pushya. That remains the reality. And the question is, in order to arrive at such a conclusion, this is not something one can observe the comet one time and reach this conclusion. Impossible. Which itself tells you that Indian astronomers were watching this comet and many other comets for a very long time. Now, is there any additional corroborative evidence for that? Of course, you see the comets in Ramayana, you see the comet in Mahabharata, but there is an astronomy text called Parashar Tantra, and it lists many comets and the types of comets and all kinds of good stuff. But just with that introduction, I'm going to get into the phases and positions of the moon. Okay, let's begin with day one, and that 1-1 means for the day one, I am here presenting a few pieces of evidence, and this one is the first piece for the first day. So it will go 1-1, 1-2, 1-3, 1-4, such like that, and then it will go to day 2 and 2-1, 2-2, 2-3, and so on. For day first day of the war, 16 October 5561 BCE. Here we have a wonderful description of moon and sun together, and they were afflicting Nakshatra Rohini. The specific word that is used is Pida, and it's very important we understand that. Watch my other astronomy, Mahabharata dating videos with the word Pida. So you can type Mahabharata Pida, Peeda, and Nileshok, and you will find the whole video. Here there is a description of both Shashi and Bhaskar, that is moon and the sun, together giving affliction, creating affliction, giving pida, okay, causing a torture, whichever way you want to translate it. We will simply use the word affliction, okay. Both, so Rohini Pidayatteva Ubhaucha Shashi Bhaskaro. So both sun and moon together were giving pida to Rohini. Does it match for the first day of the Mahabharata war? Absolutely. The first day of the Mahabharata war is Kartik Amavasya. The sun and moon are together. Their specific position is near Nakshatra Jyeshtha Mula Purvashada. Uh, for the specific year 5561 BCE, near Nakshatra Mula. Okay. And from there, now we have to imagine, okay, what does Vyasa mean when he says, these two together are giving pida to Rohini? Now, I'm simply giving you astronomy description. That's where I want you to stick. I do not want anyone, shame on you if you do that, to confuse between an astronomy explanation and an astrology explanation. But since many people are familiar with astrology explanation, I'm saying think of this as a opposition. Like, in astrology, the first house, the opposite of that is the seventh house, and the second house, the opposite of that is the eighth house. And, that's how we say it, exactly 180-degree opposite. Not exactly, approximately 180-degree opposite. So think of it in this fashion. Now, why can we say that that's how it has to be this pida? For a simple reason. At the time of Mahabharata war, we do know the exact position of the sun. Of course, the moon, but just remove the moon for a second. We know exactly where the moon has to be. Why? Because we know it was the lunar month of Margashirsha. So, the position of the sun must be approximately 180-degree opposite of Mrugashirsha, that is in the region of Jyeshtha, Mula, and you can say Anuradha, Jyeshtha, Mula, Purvashada, Uttarashada, somewhere in that region. Okay? Alright. And so this pida has to be from a distance. There is no other way. Now, there are a number of Mahabharata researchers who have not bothered to read Mahabharata text, who don't understand astronomy, don't understand logic, and I would encourage you, without naming names, just go and read their stuff. See the atrocious nonsense that is being created. But to make a mistake, to err is human, that's not the problem. But even when it's pointed out to them, in their attachment of the raga, dvesha and moha, the emotional attachment to their stupidity, the dvesha, they cannot imagine somebody else doing better than them. Well, they have not even done good, forget doing better. And then muda, moha, in their lack of intellect and stupidity, which is to say, this is not about who figured this out, this is not about one researcher versus another, but this is about finding out the truth, or the best approximation to the truth about our history, our itihas. And when I say our, I mean humanity. Okay? Of course, this happens to be specific to India, but to know India's itihas is to understand humanity's itihasa. Those people who have studied this subject well know that. So the point is, the pida by Shashi Bhaskar together to Rohini can only be understood when done from a distance in the context of the Mahabharata war. No other possibility exists. And once you understand this, you will see, just like solving a jigsaw puzzle, a crossword puzzle, all the additional, I don't remember the exact number, 6 to 7 additional references where there is a reference to pida, the word used is a pida, falls in place. It solves that portion of the puzzle. And for that, I would encourage all of you to watch my video. You can simply find it by searching with Mahabharat Pida Nileshok. Type these 3 words in YouTube and you will find that video. Okay. This is very useful. Okay. We are not going to look at the other Pida references because we are not looking at the planetary references. So we will now get into the phases and positions, but this reference was related to the moon and the sun, and therefore I included it. Frankly, this is also true of this word akramya and tishtati. There are additional 4-5 references where you will hear the word akramya and you will hear the word tishtati. Now keep tishtati, keep that in mind. Sometime the combination, there are different permutations and combinations. Other times you are going to see the word akramya aligned with a pida, and there may be some other words that are connected with the tishtati, and accordingly we have to see what makes sense, and we will do that. I have already done that. If you watch my other videos in the planetary series Mahabharata planetary evidence, okay. So this also, once you understand the meaning of akramya and tishtati, immediately all the astronomy references from the Mahabharata with the word akramya tishtati, and I showed you the pida also on the next page there, and the word pida, suddenly 6 or 7 or 8 or 10 references, the mystery is gone. You perfectly find a place for them, and it beautifully aligns for 5561 BCE. Okay, let's go to the day 1 second reference. The sun rose as if split in two. The day is that of a Kartika Amavasya. There is a good reason based on astronomy evidence, based on a Mahabharata descriptions, that this could be the day of a solar eclipse. However, Mahabharata text talks of solar eclipse, talks of a lunar eclipse, but does not explicitly states that there is a solar eclipse on the first day of the war. Therefore, I am showing you the available evidence. Remember, Nyaya principle, Pramana Tashartha Pratipatte. We can only talk of evidence that we have, which is to say we can prove things only using the pramana, only using the evidence. So we are saying, okay, it appears to be a possibility. Well, first thing, Mahabharata does say there was a solar eclipse and lunar eclipse around the timing of Mahabharata war. So they are going to happen either on Amavasya or a Purnima, depending on the type of eclipse, the solar or lunar. And how many Purnimas and how many Amavasyas around the Mahabharata war? Well, the war lasted for 18 days, guys. Okay, so 2 possibilities. And if you want to cover like a month before and a month after or something, so then we have what? Maybe 6 possibilities. Like 6 possibilities, and out of that, there were those 2 eclipses. Okay. The first day of the Mahabharata war, the description is Dvidha Bhuta Ivaditya Udaye Pratyadrishyata Jwalantya Shikhaya Bhuyo Bhanu Manu Dito Divi. That Shikhaya is like, if you have heard of, I mean, we can translate this to mean if you have heard of the solar flares, the Jwala, the Surya ki Jwala, okay? And Dvidha Bhuta Ivaditya, you know, the Aditya rose, Udaye Pratyadrishyata, literally was seen as if split in two. That's the description of it. And could this be related to the eclipse in some fashion? Well, other than what the evidence is given to us, we don't know. But yes, it very likely referring to something that is related to the eclipse itself, or could be related to the eclipse itself. So this is for the first day of the Mahabharata war. Let's look at the next one. The sun rose with its splendor last. Now, isn't that interesting description? Papata Mahati Cholka Pragmukhi Bharatarshava, like, you know, there is also asteroid shower happening there. Okay, and then it says Atha Sanjaya Maneshu Saineshu Bharatarshava Nishprabho Abhyudiyat Surya Saghosho Bushcha Chalaha Nishprabho Abhyuday, you know. So sun rose, sun came up, okay, and lost of its splendor. Now this also beautifully, at least it alludes to a eclipse like situation. So it could be. Again, we know that this is the day of Kartika Amavasya. Let's look at the next reference from the first day. Here it says the dust made the sun disappear. Now this is very interesting. Actually, throughout the Mahabharata war, you have multiple references during the day and during the night saying due to the war, due to the fighting, so much dust went up the air that it covered the sun, it covered the moon, it was impossible to see, there was total darkness on the battlefield, and so on. Now, it could be very much purely due to the dust, okay, as it is stated. But I wanted to just state this. Again, this is the first day of the Mahabharata war. Ubhayo Sena Yostivra Sainyanam Samagamaha Antardhiyata Chaditya Sainena Rajasavruta. So, like, because of the soldiers and fighting, you know, the dust uh, so too much dust was in the air, and the sun disappeared. My point is, it could be very much due to the dust, but also consider a possibility that maybe there was of course the dust and that had its own role, but on top of it, let's say there was an eclipse and this all came together, and the person might have said, the sun disappeared because of the dust. In reality, it could be because of the dust plus the fact it was an eclipse. So I'm just raising that as a possibility. This is not something new I am doing, guys. This I have stated 30 plus years ago. It's in my books, the When Did the Mahabharata War Happen or Bhishma Nirvana, okay, and into many of my lectures. But I'm giving you in the context of the days how powerful, how rich, super rich this evidence is. Okay, let's look at the fifth one from the first day. Now, this is what I meant, that sometime the author, the Vasudev, has given a idea about the timing of the particular day, like as in Tithi, as in the position of the moon, the Tithi, the phase of the moon, but in a different fashion. For example, here it said the fighting ended with the sunset. Okay, but let me see, yeah, the fighting ended with the sunset, but the description is given that fighting ended with the sunset. And one more thing it says, prapte chastam dinakare na pradnyayata kinchana. So fighting stopped with the sunset, and the darkness was such that practically nothing could be seen. Okay, na pradnyayata kinchana. Okay. Now, what does this signify? This signify, anyone who knows the basics of astronomy 101, it signifies a day of Amavasya or a day very close to Amavasya on both sides, but a day very close to Amavasya. Okay? All right. Let's go to the day 2. Here also the fighting ended with the sunset. Again, what does that tell you? Well, fighting could end any time. By the way, there is this misunderstanding, a colossal confusion, because again people don't read Mahabharata. And what is that confusion? The confusion is, the war supposed to stop at the sunset. Nonsense. There was no such agreement. The agreement was that when the war needs to stop, both parties may mutually decide. Of course, as a directional sense, yeah, at the time of sunset. But as I'm going to show you with the evidence, that was not at all followed. And this is not like some adharma yuddha kind of nonsensical discussions that you hear in social media. No. The simple discussion was they both parties will decide when to stop. Now, sunset is a kind of a natural signal, just like sunrise is a natural signal for beginning of a war. But the both parties can decide. And if one party decides, the other party will kind of honor the decision. That's the kind of discussion they had. I would encourage everyone to read the Mahabharata text where they agree to the rules, as to what is allowed, what is not allowed, and so on. So again, here the discussion is the fighting stopped at the time of sunset. Now here it is not said the darkness was such that nothing could be seen, but it is said on the first day, and you can kind of relate, maybe that is the reason. Now, one data point will not tell you the whole picture. Sometimes it does, like Arundhati Vasishta. But that's exceptional. That's why it is the revolutionary astronomy observation of the 21st century, bar none. But small astronomy observation by itself may not tell you the whole story, but when put together, actually it tells an amazing story. So remember this, day 1, the fighting stopped at sunset. Day 2, fighting stopped at sunset. Day 1, the darkness was such just after sunset that nothing could be seen. A day close to Amavasya. Let's look at the day 3. Here, in the fighting, middle of fighting, a reference is made to Amavasya that just went by, and actually when the sun and moon were seen together. Again, this also alludes to a solar eclipse. Okay, as such Amavasya they are together, but even they were seen. So this alludes to again the solar eclipse 3 days ago. Now what is that reference? In fact, I think it was Abhimanyu and Satyaki, like one of the two, they lost their chariot, and that person had to jump on the chariot of the other. And those two together, Abhimanyu and Satyaki, the Mahabharata author tells us that they looked like the they looked like moon and sun together of the past Amavasya, the way the sun and moon were seen together on past Amavasya. Amavasyam gatau yad vat soma suryo nabhastale. Just like the moon and sun were seen together in the sky on the past Amavasya, past meaning like 2 days ago. Similarly, the Abhimanyu and Satyaki were seen together on that one chariot. This is the story of the third day. See how beautifully they are making Vyasadeva. Celestial is equal to terrestrial. Whatever is happening on the Terra, the war, the fighting, he is explaining it. He is explaining it. He is describing it with the help of what he is seeing in the celestial sphere. Okay, that is Galileo's celestial equal to terrestrial. Vyasadeva giving us a anubhuti of this long time ago, more than 7,000 years ago before Galileo. That's the significance of it, guys. Okay, that should give you the goosebumps. Okay, now what I'm showing you there, I might have not mentioned it the previous day. So the second day, you see, this is the Pratipada day, and just a small crescent. If you are lucky, you may be able to see it in the sky. Now this is Dvitiya. Think of this as a Dvitiya, the day 3. And that's when the discussion is happening. Now what happens on day 3 also, the fighting stopped, ended with the sunset. Day 1 ended with the sunset. It was total darkness after sunset. A day close to Amavasya. Day 2 it ended with sunset. Day 3 it ended with sunset. Let's go to day 4. 19 October 5561 BC. Again the fighting ended with the sunset. Think of this, imagine approximately of course as the day of a Tritiya. Okay, Shukla Tritiya. That's the crescent moon you will see, and again the fighting ended with the sunset. Day 5, lo and behold, the fighting ended with sunset. Okay, that's the description, guys. So first 5 days the fighting ended with the sunset. We have to wait for the 6th day when actually the fighting for the first time went beyond sunset. Okay, Duryodhana, just when the sun was setting, Duryodhana made fresh attack on Bhima as the sun turned red, and that is the time of sunset. Okay, so here Duryodhana is basically intensifying the attack. This is on the 6th day, just from the phase of the moon. Notice, okay, so this would be like a Panchami, for example. So a slight illumination, I mean a better illumination than the previous 4 days, not significant on the Panchami, Shukla Panchami. And for this, again, you know astronomy 101, or expose yourself, find an opportunity to actually watch the night sky through a month and just become familiar with, and do it for a while, do it for a few months when you get a chance, and see the kind of illumination that you see with respect to a specific tithi and a phase of the moon. Okay, then you will relate to this more meaningfully. Okay, and that same 6-day fighting continued beyond sunset for some time. The Mahabharata tells us for a muhurtas tasmite surye chakrur yuddham sudarunam. Okay, so it went on for some time, a muhurta. It is given as approximate way, so for an hour or so, let's say, post sunset. And Duryodhana, so that's over. Okay, so it went on for an hour. Now we go to day number 7. Duryodhana, as the sunset was happening, as the sun turned red, the timing of sunset, Duryodhana asked to hurry and intensify the attack, okay, on the 7th day. That is the description we have. So again on the 7th day, the fighting is continuing beyond sunset. Okay, at sunset, Ghatotkacha, that is the description of a 7th day. Okay, that's all we have. Now let's go to day 8. Again, at sunset, Ghatotkacha defeated Kaurava army, and he just was becoming extremely fierce, and Bhishma and Sanjay made a feeble attempt to stop the Kaurava army who was running away from Ghatotkacha. Okay, so which means the war was just intensifying when sunset occurred. Notice this, first 5 days stopping at sunset, but beginning 6th day, 7th and 8th, now as if for a growing amount of duration time, the fighting was continuing. Okay, and the fighting continued into the night. Okay, that's what Mahabharata tells us. Fighting continued into the night until everyone was exhausted. So that was the reason they finally stopped. Of course, the day we are looking at on the eighth day is like what? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So like a Saptami. So yes, there is some moon illumination due to the moon during the night, but not for a very long time. Okay. So very likely when the moon set, they possibly stopped, but it could be that they both parties were so exhausted they stopped. Okay. First mention, and this is the first day, by the way. The war has began on Kartika Amavasya. Moon is hardly visible. Okay, yes, it is there for some time with a growing day at the end of the day after sunset, but very short duration. It is the eighth day, finally the Saptami Tithi or so, around that Saptami Ashtami, the first mention description of the moon since the war began comes. So I am showing you these phases. Okay, the Pratipada, Dvitiya, Tritiya, Chaturthi, Panchami, Shashti, Saptami. Guess what? Mahabharata text is not talking at all about the moon for the first 7 days. Only on the eighth day there is a mention of a moon that you see in the Mahabharata text, which is where after the finally the fighting, everyone is exhausted, fighting is over, and now Duryodhana is going towards the camp, the tent of Bhishmacharya or Dronacharya, and there is this description. That's where you are seeing the Shushubhe Chandrama Yukto. This is the first instance since the war began of a mention of a moon. Now some people say, what do I do with that? Well, if you think like that, this talk is not for you. Mahabharata evidence is not for you. Possibly scientific investigation is not for you. Okay, this is for a very refined minds, refined intellect. That's what this is. And just on all fronts you need to have it, like Shraddha, Virya, Smriti, Samadhi, Prajna. Somebody says, I have a Shraddha. Well, that's not sufficient. You have to have a Virya. You have to have a tenacity. You have to have titiksha, hard work, but a ability to stay with no success for a very long time. Work with this. Virya, Smriti. Okay, a background, voracious knowledge so that you can connect the dots. Shraddha, Virya, Smriti, Samadhi, ability to focus on a certain problem until you solve it and not give up for days and weeks and months and years. And then Prajna, you have to have a refined intellect if you are going to connect. So somebody says, okay, so what's the big deal? So the moon was mentioned only on the 8th day. Just by itself, it's not a big deal, but when you connect the dots, all the references, it basically gives you a beautiful picture. The war beginning with Kartika Amavasya and how the evidence is consistent from day to day. So this is on the 8th day of the war. Let's look at the 9th day. Fierce fighting began when the sun was ready to set. Do you see the pattern? For the first day, the fighting stopped at the sunset. 6th day, it went for some time after sunset. 7th even longer, 8th even longer, and 9th even longer than the previous days. Fierce fighting began when the sun was ready to set. Okay, this is just a day before Bhishma died in the sense fell in the battlefield, by the way. Okay, so that's what is happening. And post sunset, Bhishma was, he went on a rampage. Bhishma was killing the Pandava army, and exhausted army men were waiting for the fighting to stop. Of course, on the Pandava side more so, but even on the Kaurava sides, because they have to protect Bhishma, his chariots, his different Ratha Chakra, and so on. So they cannot leave either. Okay, so we don't know exactly how long, but it went on for a very long time. In fact, you don't know what Sanjaya says. In fact, therefore, we don't know exactly how long on the 9th day it went. It is not clear when exactly the fighting stopped, because what Sanjay says, as stated in the Mahabharata, is that all Sanjay says to Dhritarashtra is that he did not observe the fighting after this time, which is to say, he said, okay, it's time for my bed, I am going. He's a journalist, remember? He said, I am going back to my camp. So he actually left even when the fighting was still continuing. So he did not know exactly when it stopped. But of course, the Mahabharata description does tell us that eventually the fighting did stop and everyone returned to their camps. So that is the description. Okay. All right, let's come to the day one. This is the last day when Bhishma is the military general from the Kaurava side. He fell down in the battle, and from this day he was on the bed of arrows, protected. That area was protected by soldiers. Both party respected that, of course, because he is the Pitama for the whole family. And then he was on the bed of arrows waiting for the day of winter solstice beginning on this day, 25th October 5561 BC, for more than 95 days. That's what Mahabharata text tells us, with a super rich 100 plus pieces of evidence. And finally, the day of winter solstice in that year was 30 January 5560 BCE, and on 31st January 5560 BCE was the day of Bhishma Nirvan. Bhishma left his body on that day. Interestingly, now the 10th day is, just like we said, 8th day is the first mention of a moon. The 10th day is where the first appearance of full moon description since the war began. Also, a reference to Rahu comes here. Okay, the first mention of a Rahu, and we will see why that is so. But the first mention of a full moon, Purne Nishakaram, that occurs on the 10th day of the war. Now, many of the Mahabharata researchers, again, because of a lack of intellect, refined intellect, lack of background smriti knowledge, lack of the background knowledge, agama of either the astronomy, either the Mahabharata, either the Sanskrit, either the scientific acumen, that is Vijnana Buddhi, Tarka Shastra, Tantra Yukti, and a kind of stupid eagerness to become popular, they will stick with atrociously nonsensical claim and talk utter nonsense. Do watch their videos. It's a lot of fun. Some of them have created deliberate confusion and utter nonsense, foolishness in the trying to do this in the confuse people. And so, for example, they will say, oh, Nilesh says that there was a Purnima day on the 10th day of the war, and then he says there was a Purnima day on the 11th and 12th and 13th and 14th and 15th and 16th and 17th and 18th day of the war. Well, he doesn't even stop there. He even goes to the day after and he says that was also a full moon day, a Purnima day. I have never said such nonsense. So the joke is on them. What you are going to see here, with a beautiful evidence and a simple knowledge of astronomy 101, a 6-year-old can do a better job than these foolish Mahabharata researchers. What you see here is, look at the moon, how it would have appeared in the sky on the 10th day of the war. That's what I'm showing you, the phases beginning with Kartika Amavasya. Okay, just to an ordinary eye. And if you watch my post over last 15 plus years, many times actually I post the photograph of the moon on the 10th day of the war. Like I post photographs of the Dashami, I post the photographs of Ekadashi, Dwadashi, and so on, just to illustrate this point. If you just look at it, and depending on the visibility of that day, depending on the clarity of the sky, the quality of the camera that I'm using, the other light effects, you will not able to say whether it is a full moon or some other thing. Now, of course, the person who is good at it, he'll say, yeah, it's not a full moon. It looks like maybe a day before, 2 days before or something. But that's the point. In fact, this should open up another discussion. Just for the sake of digression, I'll not go there. But what was the original meaning of a Shukla Paksha and a Krishna Paksha? I will make a separate video on this. To the best of my knowledge, there is no clear mention of it, there is no clear discussion of it into the entire Indian text. And I hope it is there. I'm confident it must be there, but I have not come across. If you do come across it, bring it to my attention. But let's get back to this subject. So we have the 10th day of the war. The first time we have a description of a full moon. Okay? And also Rahu, by the way. But Parvaniva Susankruddho Rahu Purne Nishakaram. Nishakar is the moon. Purna Nishakar, full moon. Okay? That is the description. full moon like full moon. In fact, I might have said that. I will say it here. Full moon like full moon. Full moon like moon. Okay. So the visibility is such 75% plus illumination of the moon, and therefore it is described as if like a full moon. Okay, so we have this first time description occurring like a full moon on the 10th day, the first description on the moon on the 8th day. Okay, let's go next. So 10th day, what else we have? Something immensely important piece of evidence. Again, as I said, one piece of evidence by itself doesn't do a damn thing. Occasionally it does, such as Arundhati Vasishta, a revolutionary observation of 21st century. But a series of evidence logically connected together can actually paint for us a beautiful, logical, scientific, rich picture. That's what I am trying to do it here. The day 10th, some other piece of evidence, amazing, immensely useful. This one piece of evidence decisively falsifies 50+% of the claims, alternate claims for the Mahabharata researcher, namely their specific the first day of the war. What is it saying? On the 10th day, the moon rising with its pointed head down. The 10th day of the war was the day of Shukla Paksha. That's what it says. And of course, the day ended with the injuring of Bhishma. I said killing because the word used is hata. That means injured, seriously injured, but it also means kill, okay, of Bhishma. We know that he wasn't killed. Actually, everyone thought he was killed, but then he said, no, I am here. And he looked at the sun, realized it's Dakshinayan, and then decided to stay on the bed of arrows, waiting for the day of winter solstice. And Mahabharata tells us that he was there for more than 95 days on a Sharashaya. Okay, but this moon rising with its pointed ends down. Okay, apasavyam grahascha krura lakshmanam nishakaram avakshirascha bhagavan udatishtata chandrama. Okay, avakshirascha, by making its pointed ends down, moon rose on the 10th day of the war. Now actually, if you look at the moon of the 10th day in this specific case, because it's like a Shukla Nomi, it may not be very obvious, but to understand the pointed ends down, you may look at the Pratipada and a Dvitiya and Tritiya and Chaturthi and Panchami. What you will see, and of course you can see it everywhere, but my point is it's lot easy to grasp this concept of pointed ends down. It is saying, look at this soft circular piece, but its pointed ends, they are facing downward. And I don't know if I have done that, but after the full moon, and then you get into the Vadya Paksha, and as the moon approaches near Amavasya, you will see the picture is exactly opposite. You see a crescent moon like this, but it's like a turn upside down, meaning its pointed ends are pointing upwards when it's rising. Whereas here on the 10th day, the Mahabharata text tells us that its pointed ends were downward. That tells us the 10th day of the war was in the Shukla Paksha. Now, why it decisively falsifies 50+% of the claims of Mahabharata researchers, especially those who have shown, okay, what was I trying to say? Especially those who have claimed the first day of the Mahabharata war to be either Margashirsha Shukla Ekadashi. That is the only other, at least a reasonable, albeit wrong choice. But people have gone on a total wild tantrums and claimed Dwadashi, Trayodashi, Chaturdashi, even the Purnima, Margashirsha Purnima as the first day of war, with no evidence to back it up. The Hitchens razor applies. A claim made without evidence can be dismissed without evidence. Okay. Now here the evidence is decisively falsifying that particular claim, whether Margashirsha Shukla Ekadashi, Dwadashi, Trayodashi, Chaturdashi or Purnima. Okay. So one piece of evidence by itself is not conclusive. It may not be conclusive. Sometimes it is, like Arundhati Vasishta. But here by itself may not be conclusive, but now you look at together with all the data points so far and the one we are going to look at, and it basically tells us a very decisive timeline for the 18 days of the Mahabharata war. Let's go to quickly day 11. 28th October 5561 BCE, sorry 26th, forgive me, 26th October. Beautiful description of the moon, okay, like, and here also some Mahabharata researchers have created atrocious idiotic nonsense. I have to give so many adjectives, like Indians in general talk with lots of adjectives. Okay, so you can see that as a genetics and allele. But more than that, uh, it is impossible to describe the deliberate nonsense, the atrocious foolishness that is being created, and therefore I am repeating this and using this time. Some people, they say, oh, why are you talking about others? Guys, the analysis is about different individuals. This is a way to show people how to do research, how to do the comparison, how to approach a better theory, okay, how to approach the truth, how to get closer, how to make the best approximation to the truth. That's what this is about. So some Mahabharata researcher, because of the lack of, again, all of the things that I have stated, you know, this fellow took this Chitre Rathe Pandusuto Babhase and then putting the words in my mouth. This is called foolishness. Ramdas Swami has stated it in no unclear terms. He has not minced the words. Akshare गाळूनी वाची काते घाली पदरीची निघा न करी पुस्तकाची तो एक मूर्ख. People will, I have said something, they will deliberately drop the appropriate references that my trolls do every day. And sometimes they will put words in my mouth which I have never said. That is akshare galuni vachi. Sometimes deliberately drop what I have said. Kate ghali padarichi, or put their own words in my mouth. Nigana kari pustakachi, not giving the proper justice to somebody's research. To yek murkha. Such a person is a fool. That's what Samartha Ramdas Swami has said in Murkha Lakshana. So this fellow, this Murkha fellow, has taken this Chitra Rathe Pandusuto Babhase, Nakshatra Chitre Viyati Vachandra, and then along with this stupidity of claiming that I am saying full moon every day, he said, look, this guy says that full moon is near Nakshatra Chitra, or by this logic of mine, I must be saying it must be Chitra, or people must come to this conclusion. What kind of stupidity is this? Here the Chitre Rathe has nothing to do with the Nakshatra Chitra, by the way. And therefore I thought I will show this verse, okay. So this is day 11, let's go to day 12. Again, you are going to be amazed with the kind of evidence. Now here, not only the full moon like moon is described, but it is described near Nakshatra Kritika. How nice. And if you go and actually look at in simulation 27th October 5561 BCE, lo and behold, and not a surprise, you are going to see a full moon like moon, the full moon of Ekadashi, okay? So moon of a Shukla Ekadashi, which is like a full moon near Nakshatra Kritika. And that's what Vyasadeva is saying. Malyadamavata Raja Shvetashchatrena Dharyata Kritika Yoga Yuktena Paurnamasyam Ivenduna. Indu, that is how the India name has also come, by the way, okay? Paurnamasya, the Saumya Desh, okay? Saumya, soft climate. Why? Because of the Himalayas. So the harsh climate of the north is not there. And Indu means Saumya, of course you know that. That's how we call it a Soma or Saumya Masa, like as in lunar months and so on, okay? Anyways, Kritika Yoga Yuktena Paurnamasya Ivenduna. That also tells us not only the phase of the moon, but even the position of the moon. Okay, same day, full moon like moon description. Just notice the Purna, Sampurna Chandrabhamukha. Day 13, same day again. Okay, sorry, the next day. Here again we have a full moon like moon and as if eclipsed. Okay, as if eclipsed.